not enough just to say, hey, I have a podcast, go listen. Some people might do that, but it's more of a let's make sure that they go listen.
Well, I will retell the story, just so that folks will know what we're talking about. But I have a client that I basically have shown how to set up a podcast. And when I say shown how to set up a podcast, this is something that, my company does. We actually set everything up for her. And she is probably 13 episodes in right now. I think about 17 or 18 episodes recorded. And we're having a conversation, just kind of recapping on how is everything going. And one of the things that she says to me is that I'm struggling with word of mouth. When I meet somebody in person, a lot of the people who I tell about my show are not already podcast listeners. So I struggle with trying to figure out how to get somebody who doesn't already listen to a podcast to listen to a podcast. And one of my initial thoughts was, well, we're like 13 weeks in. Why have we, when I say we're 13 weeks into the podcast, but we have been talking about podcasting and building her platform and all this kind of stuff for probably 8 months at this point. And like this part has never come up. So there were some assumptions that I just made on my part. Well, you know how to use your phone. You know how to use Spotify. You know how to use Apple Podcasts. You know how to use YouTube or YouTube Music. But those aren't good assumptions because she actually didn't know how to use those things. So she didn't know that if you're not on an iPhone, that you would have to tell somebody to use Spotify, tell them to use a third-party podcast application. So it kind of just got me into thinking that, and I've said this for years, one of the hardest things in podcasting to do is to get a non-podcaster to listen to a podcast. And I think as creators, we sometimes think that when someone tells you that they're not a podcast listener or they don't listen to podcasts, we think that they don't like listening to podcasts. And that could be the case. In fact, that's probably the case 40 to 50% of the time, maybe even more. But there's a lot of folks who don't listen simply because it's just something they've never done. And, Bodie, I was, in the green room when I was giving you the analogy is like, there's a lot of people who have never watched Netflix. It's not that they have anything against Netflix. It's just, they simply have just never done it. So if you were trying to get someone to watch a show on Netflix, you can't just tell them to go watch a show on Netflix. You might have to actually show them how to do it. In the same way, there are people that, believe it or not, who have never used their YouTube app on their phone. And so if you're trying to tell them how to get to a podcast or get to a show or get to content on YouTube, you can't just tell them to go do it. You might have to show them how to do it. And that's and you said, hey, Rob, this is an episode. Let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah. This is definitely an episode. So, Rob, when we first started, you said, I've got this shirt that says, ask me about my podcast. And I was like, I would not only would I never wear a shirt like that, I would never just tell people about my podcast. Now, in the time that we've been doing the show, almost 2 years now, I tell way more people about my podcast. I was just like, somebody bring up electric vehicles. I kind of tell them what I knew, and then I would move on. There was not an opportunity for me to give them, or it was an opportunity, but in my mind, it was not an opportunity to promote my show. I was just like, we're going to have this conversation. We're going to move on. I'm not going to say anything. Now, I wouldn't say I'm annoying about it, but I'm much more open about having a podcast and all the things that go with that. But the biggest thing is, right, in those situations is you may be feeling like I did, like, oh, I don't want to bug this person with the thing that I'm doing, but they actually might be interested, like, especially if they touch upon a topic that you have expertise in, or maybe maybe you have a comedy podcast and they like comedy. There's definitely things or areas. I don't want to say this. There are definitely opportunities to tell somebody about your podcast. Now, if you're at a funeral and you're talking about the deceased and you want to tell people about your new anime podcast, maybe not the best place. I'm not saying it's not the best place. I'm just saying it's maybe not the best place. And we as creators have a really good opportunity, because if I go on DTNS and I say, hey, go check out Kilowatt, maybe one or two people is going to be like, yeah, I'll look at it. But if you and I are actually having an in-life, man, my brain is just melted as soon as I hit record today, Rob. If you and I are actually having an experience in real life, like we're having a conversation, looking eye to eye, the chance that somebody's going to check out your podcast because of this experience that you have is much, much higher. And it's 1-to-1, right? Or 1 to a few versus 1 to thousands. You're probably going to get, if you have a group of 5, you're probably going to get 2 that check out your podcast. But you can't just say, hey, I have this podcast. They might go look it up. They might forget the name. This is your opportunity to be like, hey, here's my podcast, or here's my TikTok channel, or here's my YouTube channel. And then, help them subscribe. Now, we were talking in the green room a little bit about how some of our friends help them subscribe. Do you want to go over that, Rob?
Yeah, I want to say one thing though, because I'm certain that I said this on this show before. I am a proponent of telling people about your podcast at every opportunity where it's not inappropriate to do so. To just piggyback on that, and you said that you have kind of come around to that. I'm not saying that I preached it to you, but you got to tell them, because here's the thing: we think that if we tell somebody something one time and they don't take action on it, that is the decision. And really what has happened when you tell somebody something one time, they don't even necessarily perceive that you told them anything. It's like, think of it like this. If you see a television commercial, you never, unless it's a really, really good television commercial, you never actually notice the commercial the first time you see it. You notice it when you've seen it the second or the third time. That's when you actually perceive that, oh, there's a pattern match. I've seen this before. I know it's about to happen. But even then, that's not when you make your decision. Usually it takes, 5 to 7 times of a message coming to you before you make a decision. Now, that decision may be, I don't like this commercial. I wish I would stop seeing it. Or it'll be, oh, I really think I want that shirt. I want to go find out how to get one. But usually it takes about 5 to 7 times for something like that to happen. So that's why I always say, tell people about your show at every single opportunity. You have to do so if you're trying to grow your show, because if you don't do it, who else is going to? That being said, though, if you really think about what we generally tell people, you and I both do this. New episodes out, go listen to it wherever you get your podcast. That is a lot of work that you're asking someone else to do. You really are asking someone else to do you a favor. Now, there may be content in there that will benefit them. They don't know that until they actually check it out. And initially, the favor is, I have a new show. Go check it out. Do me, do me the hookup. That's a lot of work, because you're making them have to figure out, okay, what app am I going to go listen to this in? If they're not a podcast listener, am I going to download an app? Do I already have an app on my phone? There's a lot of decision that they have to go through. And what was the name of the show? Was it beyondthepost.com? Did he say FM? Did he say .na? What is it? We definitely are beyondthepost.fm, but if the person didn't know that, they might have a hard time searching for that. So when you're going through and you have that opportunity, and this is one-on-one situations or one to few situations where you literally are physically with someone and you're telling them about your show, you can show them how to listen to it as compared to just telling them to. So one of the things that I do is I have QR codes, which actually are quick links to take you directly into whatever is the primary app on the phone that you're on. If you're using an iPhone, I will have a link directly to my show. So if you scan the link with your phone, it'll bring it right up in Apple Podcast, and you can click the follow button right there. If you tell me that you have Spotify, I have a link on my phone that will take you right to Spotify. And then if you are on an Android device, I will give you a link that will take you directly to podcast to YouTube Music, which is the default player now on Android. So that, because I know that one of those 3 apps, anyone who ever listens to a podcast could listen to it in one of those 3 apps. And then if they use something else, that means they're already a podcast listener, and it would be easier for them to just search for your show in whatever application that they use. So I believe that giving someone the opportunity to, when you have the opportunity to tell someone about the show, but you're physically with them, you probably do yourself more service if you actually show them how to listen versus just saying, hey, go do this on your phone, physically go over to them and show them how to do it.
Yeah. And there's another reason to do that. So if you look, if you do a search in, let's just say Apple Podcasts, and you type in kilowatt, there's going to be a number of different kilowatt podcasts. I am one of the first. There was one that was maybe before me, but they weren't being used. So I chose that name because it was one of the only ones. Now, if you search it, there's many. So they don't know. They don't know is it the kilowatt with the white ionic 5 on it? Is it the kilowatt hour? Is it the kilowatts? I don't have a problem with any of those groups, but we all talk about electric vehicles. So is it one of those? Is it this one? Is it that one? How are they going to know? You have a podcast called the Tech John. John is JAWN. People aren't probably going to find John JAWN unless you tell them this is how you spell John.
In fact, when I am doing call outs for the Tech John, I say the Tech John, the Tech JAWN. I literally tell people how to spell it because I know everybody's going to spell it JOHN. That is just going to be the default. And you will never find my show if you search for it that way. So you're right. That there are a lot of different titles of shows that are similar, and depending on the application you're searching in, just telling someone to go find your show doesn't mean that they're going to very easily find it. So as I said, I take every opportunity to show someone how to listen as compared to telling them to go and listen. If they're a sophisticated podcast listener, they're using, they're using, Pocket Cast or some other app where they really like to go and listen to shows, then they're probably going to be fine if they want to listen to your show. But someone who doesn't do it normally, it's not because they don't like podcasts. It just may be that they've just never learned how to listen. And your show could be the one that makes them a podcast listener. You never know until you try.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back to the trying to find somebody's show. I was trying to find Charlotte Henry's YouTube channel, and she's Charlotte A. Henry or Char A. Henry everywhere. It's not like I have two choices to put into YouTube. I could not find her YouTube channel. Fortunately, she's subscribed to our YouTube channel, so I was able to find it that way. But Charlotte Henry is not a small creator. Charlotte Henry is a well-known tech reporter, and Google was not, or YouTube was not giving me her YouTube channel. And there's a lot of people named Charlotte Henry, apparently. So there's a reason to do that. Now, Chris Ashley says it jokingly to grab the phone out of their hands, subscribe to the podcast, and hand it back to them. You were saying you've seen Allison Sheridan do this. So
yeah, and Chris, I know where Chris got it. I refer to this as the Allison maneuver. We're referring to Allison Sheridan from Podfeet. I have seen Allison on numerous occasions actually someone will offer their phone to her and she physically will put in her, put in the way to get to her show. And she knows how to do this on whatever device you're using. So she is definitely an Apple person, but she knows how to get your show up on Android because she knows that there are a lot of people who listen to her Android, who are Android users. So, like I said, I call it the Allison maneuver because she literally will snatch your phone and then put her shows in it and then say, hey, so here's how they are every week when I come out. And Allison is arguably one of the most consistent podcasters I have ever seen. She is, what is she, Bodie, 19 years in or 17 years in without a miss?
I think it's 19.
Yeah. So 19 years without a miss. So she makes sure that, hey, every week, this is going to pop up. When it pops up, click on it, and you can then listen to me tell you about what I need to tell you. And she does it all the time. Like I said, she's done it with me. She showed this to Chris. I've seen her do it with other people at conferences. It's just what she does. I'm not that bold. What I will do is I'll give you a QR code, let you scan it, and then you do it. And I say, oh, yeah, it's going to come right up. Click on that follow button if it's an iPhone, or click on that subscribe button if it's, coming up in, it used to be the Google Podcast app. It's now, I still have to get used to calling it Google, what is it? YouTube Music is the official app. It's kind of weird, but it is the official music. But it's one of those things to where you behoove yourself if you know how to tell someone to listen to your show and the default players on whatever phone they have. So the defaults are going to be Apple Music for iOS. It's going to be YouTube Music for Android, and then Spotify. You want to just do that one because so many people listen to music with Spotify. There's a good chance that anybody who would ever listen to a podcast probably already has Spotify on their device.
Yeah, and I will extend this because I know Allison is very big about recommending her friends' shows to people she thinks are going to like them, especially people who are influential. Like she is an advocate, we'll just call her an advocate. Like she is a fierce advocate of her friends and what they do. And, like if you are listening to a show like this one, Beyond the Post, and you think there's another creator that might like it, subscribe, take their phone. If they're going to give it to you, ask them for their phone and subscribe to the show or any other show that you think they might like. Because really that's the best way to do it. I am a podcaster. I have 3 podcasts. I've been doing it for 8+ years. And somebody will recommend a podcast to me. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. It happened just the other day. Oh, that's a good idea. And then, I get home and I'm like, I got to text Anthony. I don't remember what he recommended. You know what I mean? It's like you have an opportunity to help out other creators, even if it's not your show. You can just recommend and put it on their phone.
If there was any good that came out of the pandemic, it was that people now across the planet know how to use QR codes, because you never wanted to go anywhere and touch anything. You didn't want to hand anybody anything. I'll take a picture of that square looking weird thing and have a website come up. I'm cool with that, but I don't want you to hand me something that may have your germs on it. So because of that, I am a huge proponent. I just keep these photos in my gallery to where it's just a QR code and the name of the show, and I can just flip through them really quickly, and it gets someone to directly into the default player on their on their device very, very quickly and very, very effectively. And I even do it with, some of these apps out here, like there is, various little apps. They're almost like Linktree apps, to where you put in your podcast RSS feed, and then it'll give you a list of every single different way you can listen to that podcast. And literally it'll be, a couple dozen different podcatching applications. And whenever you click on one of those applications, if you have that installed on your phone, it'll automatically open up in that app. And those things are also very, very good. And there's a bunch of different ones that are out there. We'll put some in our in our links here. I'm trying to think of one that I use. I think it might just be Podlink. It's probably the one that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. But just like, you go to podlink.com, put in your RSS, or put in the website to your podcast, and it will just give you every single different way you can listen to that show. And that's something that's easy, that's easy for you to do as well. So like I said, you may not have every single QR code for all the apps, but you don't really have to. You put in a link for this, you send that to someone, and then however they could possibly listen, it's just a web page that they click on the link, and it automatically takes them into that player.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Hey, Rob, we have like a few minutes left. We decided on 20 minutes for this episode, but we have about a minute and a half left. One of my favorite shows has come out of a 6-month hiatus. Do you want to talk about your valiant return of the SMR podcast?
So for those who don't know, the very first podcast, not the first podcast, one of the first podcasts that I actually started hosting was all the way back in 2008, called SMR Podcast. And we were on a major hiatus. We took almost 6 months off. And it's just because, one of the hosts, literally, his company is based overseas. And he's been literally in Europe half of his time. One of the other hosts just started a brand new food service business where, Chris has started a food trucking business. So he has been immensely busy, and then I've been busy. So we said we're going to go on a little bit of hiatus. But at CES, so many people came up to me and said, "Hey, Rob, are you guys bringing SMR Podcast back? Are you bringing SMR Podcast back?" It was at least 11, maybe 12 people at CES that came up to me specifically to talk about that show. So we got together with my other two knucklehead co-hosts, and we decided to start doing episodes again. So I think we are now 2 episodes in from our hiatus. There will be another episode going up probably by the time people listen to this, it'll definitely be up. But I think it's like it'll be going up on Valentine's Day. Will be the second episode that we've recorded, and we're going to try to get back into just a regular schedule of doing weekly shows. Now it's not going to be every single week because, like I said, if somebody is in Europe or somebody's got a big event that they've got to do. We can't, we're not going to not do that stuff. But enough people said that they wanted to, want us to bring the show back, that we're doing it. And for those who don't know, SMR Podcast kind of talks about tech, but it is essentially three buddies who go back for, darn near 2 decades. And we just get together and it's our time to hang out and we just talk about whatever comes up. And usually, because we are all really into tech, it gets back to it at some point. We have nice picks at the end of the show, that are tech picks about stuff that we are using in our day-to-day lives from a technology standpoint. But yeah, it's a fun show. It's completely unscripted. There are no show notes. I have no clue what the show is going to be about until we actually start talking about it. But, we've been doing it now since, like I said, since 2008. And people, we've gone on a couple weeks here, maybe a month there, but we've never been off for like 5.5 months. So folks have said, hey, you guys got to bring it back. So we brought it back. SMR Podcast.
Yeah, I'll put a link to the show notes show notes.
I know people are going to say, wow, why would you put podcast in the name of your show? Because I am blatantly against that. Now, you should never put the name podcast in your show if you're a podcast. The reason we did it was because we started in 2008. And in 2008, most people had no clue what a podcast was. So we had to put it in the name just so people would know what the show was.
I think I've asked you this before, but what is the SMR?
We were infringing on Simple Mobile, the telephone company.
I see.
We did not think the name through. So the initial name of the show was Simple Mobile Review.
Oh, I see.
And that was because the first probably 4, 5, 6 episodes of the show were just about phones and stuff that we were all using and reviewing and stuff like that. And I don't want to say we started the pod fade. We just started to, I don't feel like talking about phone today. This thing happened. Let's talk about that. This game was good. Let's talk about that. And when we started just having conversations and not necessarily trying to target the conversations around anything, the show kind of took off. And that's what it's been. So it's literally 3 buddies who get together once a week, hang out for 45 minutes to 1 hour and 15 minutes and just talk about whatever is coming up. And usually there will be some technology that comes up because that's what drives it.
Yeah, it's a good show. All right, Rob, why don't we tell people how to find our show? Because it's a podcast. It's a YouTube channel. We're going to put all the links in the show notes. We have a Patreon.
We're going to give you one, because if you go to this one place, you can get literally everywhere else. If you go to beyondthepost.fm, that will show you how to get to our Patreon page. It'll show you how to get to the actual audio podcast. That'll show you how to get to the YouTube channel. You can get everything by going to beyondthepost.fm.
Perfect. All right, Rob. I'll see you next week.
Have a good one, man.
I think that was good.